Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, federal charges filed today against the surviving suspect in the Boston Marathon bombing. We'll have the latest on the investigation.
I'm Peggy Pico. As San Diego pays homage to Mother Nature on Earth Day, we'll take an in-depth look at our region's environmental quality on land, sea, and air. Then a personal conversation with the father of the cell phone, what the Del Mar inventor is working on now, and the future of mobile technology.
And ancient Egypt comes to life on a San Diego stage. KPBS Evening Edition starts now.
KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Irwin Jacobs and by
Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. The surviving suspect in last week's Boston Marathon bombing could face the death penalty. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is charged with using a weapon of mass destruction to kill. He made his first court appearance from his hospital bed, where he was interrogated by U.S. officials. They say he and his older brother appear to have been motivated by their religious faith, but don't seem connected to any terrorist groups. Tsarnaev is a naturalized U.S. citizen, and the White House says he will not be treated as an enemy combatant.
We will prosecute this terrorist through our civilian system of justice. Under U.S. law, the United States citizens cannot be tried in military commissions. And it is important to remember that since 9/11, we have used the federal court system to convict and incarcerate hundreds of terrorists.
A funeral service was held today for one of the three killed in last week's bombing, and Bostonians observed a moment of silence at 11:50 this morning, marking 1 week since the attack. There will be more on the investigation tonight on the PBS NewsHour at 7. Many in the design and sports communities are mourning the loss of local architect and rugby player Graham Downs. He died Sunday from injuries suffered during an alleged assault at his home. Police have arrested one of Downs' employees on suspicion of murder. KPBS culture reporter Angela Carone has been following this story as well as Downs' career. Angela, the attack happened early Saturday morning. What do police say happened between the two men?
Well, at this point, police don't know why Downs and his employee were arguing. They were called to the scene by a neighbor who heard the two men fighting in front of Downs' home. When they arrived, Downs and the employee were lying on the ground. Downs had severe facial and head injuries and was taken to the hospital where he died on Sunday. The employee's name is Eugenio Salgado, and he was taken into custody and is in county jail on suspicion of murder. Police didn't recover any weapons on the scene either.
And what can you tell us about Downs? He was a prominent architect in town, right?
Yeah, he was. He came here from South Africa and built a very successful firm from scratch. Some of his high-profile projects were the Hard Rock Hotel downtown and Tower 23 in Pacific Beach. He was also known for his work in blighted areas. He turned old warehouses in places like Barrio Logan or the East Village into live workspaces. And he was an accomplished rugby player, too. He helped lead a local club, the Old Mission Bay Athletic Club, to several national rugby championships, and he played in the U.S. World Cup team in 1991.
KPBS arts reporter Angela Carone. San Diego City Council is taking up the issue of medical marijuana again, looking at drafting a possible law to make dispensaries legal in the city. It's one of Mayor Bob Filner's top priorities, and he says it's a real balancing act.
I think we have an obligation to provide access on just that humanitarian impulse, the humanitarian need for access to medical marijuana. On the other hand, we know that there are neighborhoods, every one of our neighborhoods, every one of our parents is concerned about the ill effects of establishing access to legal marijuana. And that is concern for their neighborhoods, concern for their children.
City documents say the draft ordinance would include distance regulations, keeping dispensaries at least 600 feet from schools, parks, homes, and from each other. Security requirements would include state licensed guards and cameras. Council did not vote today. The city attorney has suggested waiting for a planned state Supreme Court ruling on dispensary regulations. San Diego County is considering how to respond to a judge's ruling saying the county's plan to cut greenhouse gases is inadequate. KPBS reporter Allison St. John covered the plan when it was originally produced last summer. Allison, what is the county's climate action plan and why did the judge rule it inadequate?
Well, Dwayne, in its introduction, the plan says it's a document to, quote, address the issues of growth and climate change and to safeguard the environment for residents and visitors. Now, the county recently did a general plan update to describe where more development can happen in the unincorporated or rural areas of the county. And the environmental impact report that went along with that said there would be significant and unavoidable environmental impacts. In other words, more building, more traffic, more greenhouse gases. But it said the climate action plan would mitigate those impacts. And the plan does do a good job of describing the impacts and things that could be done to address them. But the Sierra Club sued, and San Diego Superior Court Judge Tim Taylor agreed with them. He said the plan needs more teeth if it's to actually meet the state-mandated goals of reducing greenhouse gases by 2020. It needs to identify how greenhouse gases will be reduced in San Diego with specific requirements and deadlines. And he compared it to the other big regional plan, that's Sandag's Regional Transportation Plan, which has also come under fire for not meeting the admittedly challenging goals of reducing greenhouse gases at the same time as accommodating more people.
Well, with all that said, what's the next step, Allison?
The Sierra Club is hoping that the county steps up to the plate and considers how to put more teeth into its climate action plan, lay down clear requirements, not just guidelines, but requirements for future growth, and include some definite deadlines. Meanwhile, the county says it's going to consider whether to appeal the judge's ruling.
KPBS reporter Allison St. John. And for more on climate action plans and our regional environmental health, here's Peggy Pico.
San Diego is home to one of the biggest Earth Day events in the country. Now, in its 43rd year, Earth Day not only pays homage to Mother Nature, it's become a reminder to check in on San Diego's current environmental state. Joining me with further details are Scott Anders, Director of USD's Energy Policy Initiative Center, and Lonnie Lutar, Executive Director of the Equinox Center. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Lonnie, this year's Equinox dashboard report looked at everything from air quality, water quality, energy. Let's start with the air quality. What is our breathing situation here like?
Well, air quality, we have some good news. The number of unhealthy air days for the San Diego County region went down from 19 to 13 relative to the prior year that we looked at. Now, our data is a little bit behind schedule. It's lagged because of when the information becomes available, but that's good news. Now, that said, we still have a long way to go. When you compare 13 in San Diego to San Francisco only had one day, it shows that we still can do a lot to improve our air quality, which of course impacts the health of all of us and also has an impact on productivity for workers.
So those numbers, it went down from 19 poor quality days to 13. So
yeah.
a little bit of an improvement there.
Absolutely.
Now, Scott, speaking of air quality, this was an interesting fact. Collectively in our county, we drive about 28 billion miles a year. That's what the BU said. And that's enough to get back to the sun, back and forth, right? Like 150 times?
That's correct.
That's crazy. That seems enormous. What is that doing to our greenhouse emissions? Where do we stand there?
Well, with 30 billion miles traveled in 1 year, it's no surprise that the transportation sector, cars and trucks, emit the most greenhouse gases of any other sector, about 45%. The next category is electricity, and then after that, natural gas. So we like to say that cars and trucks and buildings. Most of the electricity and natural gas is associated with buildings. So cars and trucks and buildings are the two areas where we see the most emissions from greenhouse gases.
Okay, and let's move on to water. The Equinox report said that we fell a little short this year. How come?
Yeah, unfortunately, the news on the waterfront was not so good because our beach closures and advisories did go up between 2010 and 2011. But despite that, 97% of San Diego beaches earned an A or a B grade from Heal the Bay But that unfortunately only looks at dry days. So then when you look at wet weather, it would only be 76%. And in 2011, if you specifically looked at time period, that was when we experienced a major power outage in San Diego County. And you might recall there was a major sewer spill as a result of that power outage. So we think that, the data is linked to that, and there's opportunity for improvement. And again, also because of the budget cuts in recent years at government, we haven't had as solid data as we used to have. So that's something we're hoping that with volunteers in San Diego, we can better track that to make sure that our water quality is safe and clean, because it not only impacts the water that you're swimming and surfing in, but it's also, of course, why tourists, a major part of our economy, come to San Diego.
Part of the economy. What about renewable energy? What's going on here in San Diego area to find to sort of, I guess, provide some incentives, or at least get us thinking about that?
Well, there's been tremendous growth in solar energy, both by businesses and households. And again, relative to the prior year of our research, we saw a 46% increase in solar installations per 100 residents. So some fantastic progress, but there's still a far way to go. SDG&E also reached its target of hitting 20% renewable energies through geothermal, wind energy, a whole host of renewable energy sources.
So we're seeing some improvement, but certainly plenty of room to grow. Now, Scott, you're working with local cities to come up with these climate action plans. Tell us what those look like.
You're correct. So we are working with the City of San Diego currently on their climate action plan. There are other cities in the region. About half of the cities in the region either have plans or are in the process of developing plans. And you know, these plans include measures to reduce greenhouse gases to specific targets, in some cases mandated by the state. And we are a pretty progressive region in this regard. All the cities have conducted greenhouse gas inventories. That's a project that was sponsored in part by the San Diego Foundation. One thing I should say about climate planning is there's been tremendous collaboration around the region. In fact, there's a website called San Diego Climate Collaborative, sdclimatecollaborative.org, where your viewers can find more information about what's happening with climate planning in the region.
And we'll definitely send people there. Also on KPBS.org, they can look at the whole equinox report and also, as you said, look at some of these plans for the cities. Thank you both so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having us.
While the Pentagon and Congress debate how to curb sexual assault in the military, the VA San Diego held its third annual Clothesline Project today to allow survivors to break their silence and share their stories.
The sad face, the rainy days.
From a cloud of despair to relying on a host of healing helpers.
The healing process that you go through.
Deborah Davis represents 1 out of every 5 female veterans to be sexually assaulted during military service. Davis suffered in silence for decades after being assaulted twice at naval bases in the U.S. and Okinawa in the mid-1970s.
I reported it to the people that I worked with, and I also reported it to the hospital that I was put into. And it was a very traumatic situation for reporting it, because they did not understand at all what I was talking about, nor did they even want to believe me.
That was more than 35 years ago, and the problem has only gotten worse. 2 years ago, there were nearly 2,500 reports of rape, aggravated sexual assault, or sodomy in the military. But only 240 cases made it to court-martial. Experts say the victims, both women and men, are at greater risk of suffering from post-traumatic stress.
It looks like the research is suggesting that it's the case that you're more likely to develop PTSD after a sexual trauma that occurred while you're in the military versus any other kind of sexual trauma. So that could be childhood trauma or some kind of domestic violence or assault outside of the military.
The VA says things are getting better, but slowly, as Congress considers ways to prevent commanding officers from overturning rulings made by judges and juries.
It means that we need to work harder, we need to raise awareness, we need to have people speaking up, we need people to stand against this.
The Clothesline Project is designed to break their silence and give sexual assault victims a voice.
I think it's harder even for men to come out on this issue today yet, but they're starting to grasp hold of they need to come out and speak up and get help from themselves.
And that's what this is really all about, is to reach out to make veterans aware of that the VA cares, that we have services for them, and that we can help them.
VA San Diego says 1,200 women and 700 men in the county have reported being victims of sexual assault while serving in the military, but the agency admits most cases go unreported.
I'm Ray Suarez. On the next news hour, the continuing fallout from the Boston bombings. That's Monday on the PBS NewsHour.
Sequestration cuts may soon affect the unemployed. Starting next week, more than 400,000 people getting extended federal unemployment benefits could see a cut of nearly 18%. The State Employment Development Department will take a $30 million hit, making it more difficult to get benefits out on time. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory canceled its upcoming open house because of federal budget cuts. Once a year for one weekend, JPL welcomes more than 30,000 visitors for an up-close look at its mission control and space rovers. The lab does offer free public tours, but those get booked up months in advance. A Sandcastle contest is coming back to Imperial Beach. It's the first organized contest since the U.S. Open Sandcastle competition ended 2 years ago because of financial problems. The new contest will be run by volunteers working with the Port of San Diego. They say it will have more community emphasis, and the competition will be open to kids and adults. It's set for June 30th. It's been 40 years since a Del Mar man made the first public cell phone call. He recently sat down with Peggy Pico to talk about the future of mobile communication.
President Nixon is inaugurated for a second term. There's a ceasefire between the U.S. and Vietnam. Henry Kissinger is Secretary of State. And in that very same year, 1973, communication changed forever with one brief cell phone call to a rival inventor. A few years later, the revolutionary phone is advertised to the public.
Right now, businessmen and women are major users of radio telephones where cellular is in service. But more people will take advantage of cellular as its benefits become apparent. Eventually, seeing people using cellular phones may seem as commonplace as someone checking time on an electronic watch, figuring on an electronic calculator, or programming on an electronic computer.
My guest, Martin Cooper, made that very first public cell phone call on the mobile phone in 1973. And this year, he's headed to Italy to pick up the highest honor in the communications and information science field, the Marsoni Prize. Martin Cooper, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you, Patty. Pleasure to be here.
I just have to say that this is the size of the phone right now. It's just incredible how much things have changed over the year. But back then, you were working over at Motorola, and they were pushing for this invention. What did it mean to you privately, personally?
Well, we were in a battle. We knew that the future was personal communications because we'd been embedded in that since World War II. And here, AT&T, the biggest company in the world, was introducing this new technology. They invented it, cellular, and it was going to be car telephones, and they were going to have a monopoly, and we didn't agree with either of those things. So we were in a battle. We had to get some attention. The cell phone was our way of doing it, and that's why I came up with that concept. You
won the battle, but you got paid exactly how much for that invention?
Well, when I joined the Motorola in 1954, they paid me $1 for all of my future intellectual property. It was the best deal I ever made, Patty, because Motorola really took care of me. They gave me the opportunity to spend 29 years doing what I had fun doing.
Let's talk about right now, because you're a forward-facing kind of inventor. How would you like to see this cell phone technology evolve?
Well, I think we're still in early stages now. We're still in what I call the Pong stage of technology. But as the technology evolves, we're about to engage in a couple of revolutions, perhaps three. One is in education. You were just talking with some educators. We are about to have the flipped classroom. And what does that mean? The children can learn now more because they're connected to the internet, to all of the information in the world continuously. They don't have to spend a couple of hours in the classroom. They can learn faster by themselves than teachers can do. So their learning is going to be out in the world, and they'll go to the classroom for a few hours a day, and that's where they get the guidance, a little bit of focus on what they ought to do. But that's going to be, children are going to be much smarter in the future.
They already are, I have to say. When it comes to what's going on among wireless carriers right now, I know there's a so-called spectrum crisis that they're saying we need more radio waves, we don't get enough. People are fighting for pieces of the pie to get their company on air. Do you see that we really are running out of radio airspace, wave space?
Well, we're running out. We haven't yet. There is no crisis now. It's obvious. People are watching television on cell phones. The problem is two things. Number one, the amount of information that we're putting with all of these new things, healthcare, education, and just collaboration. All those things are to demand more and more spectrum, and the carriers believe that they can get more, take spectrum away from other people. That's the wrong solution, because we're going to need 20 to 40 times more throughput, more bits per second, more information going through the radio waves in the next 5 years than we have today. And just a little bit of more spectrum is not going to solve the problem.
Is the solution then to invent another way to deliver this?
You got it. Would you like a job in technology, Patty? No, there is technology available today, but even though companies like Qualcomm here are really introducing spectacular new technology in the cell phone, the infrastructure, all those cell sites that you see around the city, still old-fashioned, and they have to upgrade that and adopt new technology there. Things like smart antennas that let more people talk on every radio channel. That is what is going to solve our problem, because the biggest problem is not the spectrum crunch, it's the cost. Absolutely. If we're going to do all of these things, education, healthcare, collaboration, the cost has to be much, much lower than it is today. But what is it the carriers are emphasizing? Speed. Now,
and you think it's more about money.
Oh, of course.
Of course it is. We are out of time. Martin Cooper, inventor of the cell phone, thank you so much for your insight and talking with us today.
Great pleasure to be here, Patty.
Well, you can raise a glass to San Diego's craft beer industry for pouring a lot of cash into our local economy, nearly $300 million in 2011. A new report says the economic impact from craft beer is 1.5 times the impact of Comic-Con, San Diego's largest trade show. Researchers at National University say they expect the 2012 numbers to be even higher. They say investment and partnerships are needed to keep the industry growing here. There's a chance of rain in our forecast later in the week. The Weather Service says we have a chance of showers or thunderstorms by Thursday. Coastal temperatures will be mostly in the low 60s, a bit warmer for the inland valleys, low 70s tomorrow, then upper 60s Wednesday and Thursday. For the mountains, partly cloudy, temperatures in the 60s. Plenty of sunshine in the desert with temperatures in the upper 80s and low 90s. The opera Aida gets a vibrant staging here in San Diego, thanks in part to a Del Mar resident and designer. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando takes us backstage.
We are stage left at the San Diego Opera at the Civic Theater, and we are preparing for what we call an orchestra dress rehearsal. This will be the singers and supers in their costumes, the orchestra in the pit. This is the first time that all the elements come together, lighting, sound.
And costumes. Nearly 300 bold, vivid costumes by Zandra Rhodes.
I didn't realize how bold and vivid the costumes and sets would look until they're exquisitely lit today. I have done it before, but the lighting is looking extra special. I see Egypt as having been there in 1985, and I did sketches and did drawings of the whole thing. It seemed to come to life, and I believe that the pyramids and all of the carvings on the actual buildings were once probably very bright and vivid. And so I thought it seemed ideal for gold lame. And if you think of Tutankhamun's tomb, everything's very bright in there, and that gold, you know, I think that I just felt it was an expansion on the ideas that I'd seen drawn in the tombs.
Her vibrant palette inspires singers like Mark Estos.
Colors then sort of accentuate the emotions, because when I'm singing, I sort of use sometimes a palette I have in my hands, and it has sort of a fake brush at times, and I see on that palette emotions. You know, there's anger, there's an expression of, you know, surprise, and all those things then I put on this canvas that I'm trying to draw the character. So in this sense, we have all these amazing colors, and you can't help but to be drawn into those colors and what they depict as far as the opera story goes. Very exciting and much of a challenge as well.
The challenge in opera is that it's a magical experience that you can't have anywhere else, and it doesn't have to be realistic.
Like this elephant bringing home the conquering hero.
And then the combination of the voices and the magic. I never fail to be carried away by it.
Which reminds Doss of his experience hearing Aida as an extra on stage in Cleveland.
For me to see it that close and to see the tenor, you know, wow, it's right there, I can almost touch him. You know, this is very poignant. So people that are seeing it for the first time will get that Celeste Aida, they'll get O Patria Mia that Aida sings, and then we have this duet with Aida and Amanazzo that is so powerful. Some people think it's the best of all Verdi's, you know, writing.
Bringing out the best is what prompted the San Diego Opera to invite Rhodes to design costumes in 1999. Her background had been as a textile and fashion designer, but her audacious sense of experimentation sometimes met with resistance.
When I did The Pearlfishers first, we had one of the lead characters, who will remain nameless, who wouldn't let me experiment, and he wouldn't try things, so he came out and he looked quite ordinary.
But there's nothing ordinary about Rhodes' work for the current production of Aida at the San Diego Opera. Maybe that's why performances are quickly selling out. It's a spectacle you can only appreciate from a seat inside the theater. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
Aida runs through April 28th at the Downtown Civic Theater. And you can find tonight's stories and download the KPBS app all on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.